Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of GFB Grown Folks Business on a Thursday evening. All parties involved, welcome. Some have been here before. All have been here before. Let me correct myself. Some more often than others, but the door is always open. And I'll start with welcoming CC back to the space. Glad you can make it, and glad to have you. Glad to see your face in the place. And Bob, of course, hello. Greg and Julia, hello. And Danya, as always, appreciate what you do, even though sometimes I forget to tell you that it's eternal, man. I always appreciate what you do behind the scenes. So thanks for being here. Tonight's show is in the shadow of Martin Luther King Jr.'s holiday, celebrating his birthday, and of course a day of service for the community members that appreciate what he tried to impart to this great land of ours. So the title of the show is MLK, Why We Choose the Myth Over the Man. And I think for those who are somewhat knowledgeable of Dr. King and his level of activity and his level of engagement and his willingness to truly hold this nation accountable for how it treats its citizens, especially those that have less. I think there is a knowledge that the MLK that is promoted during Black History Month, during his birthday, at any point in time that America decides to elevate or highlight one of its greatest treasures, it is more of the mythology of him and less of some of the actualities that existed and some of his actions, some of the things that he actually was standing on and willing to die for, which he actually did. So with that being said, again, welcome. I'll start off really quickly before I play these three clips in succession that I think will kind of crystallize the question. Tonight's show is more about, hey, Mary, how you doing? Good to see you. And good, I'm guessing that is Mr. Ryan. So good to meet you virtually.
Will's the way to go there, Phil.
All right, man. Good to meet you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Welcome. Glad you could join us. So I'm just framing tonight's show. So I'm going to play three clips that I think crystallize the questioning, and for tonight's show, you guys come up with answers for that one particular question. So I won't be rattling off a bunch of questions as I usually do. It'll be you guys answering the main one. Why do we choose the myth over the man when it comes to MLK? Why does American society seemingly sway towards the lighter side of the things that he was trying to get done in this society and push forward to make this country live up to its own ideals? So I wanted to make that point clear, but I'll also begin with if there's something you can share, because I believe everybody in this space probably did something in recognition of the holiday. I know I participated in an event, documentary viewing Monday evening, Monday afternoon, a documentary called The Neutral Ground, and I know Bob participated in it also. But just really quickly before I play these clips, is there something that you did, whether it was physical activity and actually volunteering or doing something of that nature, or just a moment of reflection that you may have taken in the realm of celebration of MLK Day? So really quickly, let's go around the space and just you can talk about what you might have really reflected on or tried to approach from a mental standpoint, or some actual action that you did. I watched the documentary. I had some wonderful discussions after and around it, and I think a large part of what I do in my waking life is always connected to some ideas and some of the energies that MLK exuded for our betterment. So I think it's a daily process for me for the most part. Bob, what about you?
You mentioned that I participated in that the documentary viewing, which was I'm going to say terribly emotional for me. But beyond that, for me, the day is more reflective, and because I'm old enough to remember when Martin Luther King Day became, well, I'm old enough to remember Martin Luther King. And I'm old enough to remember Martin Luther King when he was alive and what the various perceptions were of him when he was alive. And so I always reflect on that. The conflicting and varied perspectives of him as a person when he was living, but also remembering when the idea of a day for him became an idea, and when a day for him became a day, and the reactions of people about that and how people felt about that, positive, negative. And I remember heading a company during that time and making that a day, and making that a day to talk about things. So for me, it's a day of reflection over the course of a good bit of my personal experience and whatnot with that. I should make it more intentional about doing something current. The documentary piece was that for this year.
Appreciate that. Yeah, and there's no requirement. It's like people who only gain some forms of morality or what they espouse to be their religious leaning on Sundays. You can do that any day. Christmas is every day. That's the best example I have. Christmas is every day. CC, what about you? Anything you did special or any moments of reflection you care to share? And don't forget to police your microphone. Thanks. Appreciate you.
All right. So can you hear me? Because I'm always asking that. So for me, I'm working class. So I'm towards the end, the class that he was trying to help with the social justice and workers' labor rights. That was me. So Monday, while the rest of the world, it felt like, was able to celebrate Martin Luther King Jr., I was working and feeling a little salty about it, that we weren't closed on that day like everyone else. And not being alone in that, listening to other Black coworkers expressing the same dismay. So yes, when I did finally get off, I thought it was pertinent to look and see what some of our leaders were saying about him, because it's always entertaining to me that some of the worst people will choose some of the tamest quotes from King to post all over their social media and to wax poetic. But when it comes to, voting for our rights or addressing gerrymandered maps, they're not putting his words into action. So yeah, it wasn't really a day of reflection for me. It was just another frustrating day as a Black worker. So
sounds like you want to be here. Glad to have you. So yeah, let's talk about it. Gregory, Julian, what about you guys? I don't know what that's about. Okay. Let's try one more time. Everybody's muted, so go ahead and see if it works this time.
Thanks for the.
Are you guys on two devices? maybe is there two things going on somewhere? I'm gonna come back to you.
Yeah, I see one.
Yeah, you're on two devices. Is that what it is, Daniel?
Apparently, because they hold on.
That might happen when something's in proximity. I'm gonna come back to you guys if Daniel gets it sorted and everything, but I'll come right back to you, Mary and Will. What about you guys? What if anything, activity wise, or was there possibly just some moments of reflection?
Well, both of us watched the Neutral Ground documentary and stayed on for the discussion that followed that, and which is why we made sure to come on tonight. But every Martin Luther King Day, I always reflect back to when I was fairly young and the television documentary had come out. You remember it was a mini series about MLK, and that was really the first significant exposure I had to the information about his life and what went on. It certainly had never been taught it in public school. You know, maybe just a few brief mentions, but not the whole story. And that was, you know, for the time pretty comprehensive. And I always reflect on how some things have changed, but other things haven't changed at all, or very, very little. And there's so much more to do.
I apologize, and it may have been me. I dropped out for a moment, and I did hear you mention a documentary that I think you said you guys watched, and it gave you a better perspective and more in-depth view of who he was as a man, as opposed to what's pronounced more so as what Cece was alluding to earlier, the easy cherry picking of things to frame him as opposed to allowing his own words to frame him. I apologize for that. I don't know if it was me or if everybody lost contact, but I lost contact. So continue, and I'm sorry.
You will.
Oh, okay. I always remember I watched the documentary as well, which was very impressive. But I always remember the night he was shot. I lived about a mile outside of D.C. at the time. You know, growing up, I was like at 9 years old, and I remember up from the second story window at my mother and father's bedroom, we could see the glow of the flames from the riots downtown, and it was very unsettling. And I did not comprehend it at the time very much at all, but I've never. I don't know. Things like racism have just, well, something specifically like racism has never made sense to me. I mean, I was like born wired differently somehow. I don't know. It's never occurred to me that, you know, that a human being is, it's a human being's a human being. I think empathy was one of the things that came up in the discussion the other night. And I think on some fundamental level, not everyone feels that everyone else is a human being, and which makes empathy very difficult. So I don't know. And then King, I've learned so much more about him from people like Cornel West and Noam Chomsky, the people that don't get on the mainstream. You got to look a little differently to find this stuff. And I guess it was the beyond the civil rights, it was the poor and the war in Vietnam. I was very much opposed to that by the time I was, 11 or 12. But I didn't know at the time that the King was probably making himself a bigger target going into that area.
Yeah, wonderful observations, Will. So you have touched on something that the clips I'm going to play, Martin Luther King Jr. is going to touch on, and it is in consideration of that perpetual state of war, the Vietnam War is taking place. But these words that he says in one of these clips could easily be placed today, because we've been in now what is America's longest war in the Middle East. So right. Yeah, there's something that needs to be better understood from that dynamic. Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No.
Okay.
Ready to listen again.
All right. Well, I appreciate you being here. And again, if you don't mind, just hit that mute button just so we don't get feedback and reverb. Julian and Greg, let's see if you guys have got the issue solved. I want to hear from you and what your thoughts were on Monday.
Okay, let's give it another go. This sounds good. Will, we've not met before, but we have had similar early experiences. I was in Chicago while you were in DC, and I remember the riots after Dr. King was killed. In fact, my early memories growing up was one assassination after another in those early days. I remember waking up one morning and thinking, my gosh, what is going on? It was John F. Kennedy, it was Robert Kennedy, it was MLK. It just, to me, it seemed like it was in rapid succession and that we were doomed. It was the craziest things were going on. There was no explanation, didn't understand it. As you will, my family, myself, were never wired to ever think in terms of racism. We just never did. My mother was born and raised in Georgia. My father was first generation from Yugoslavia and grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. They met, got married. And in our family, there was never any racism. There was only misunderstanding, could not understand how people could behave and think the way they did. So that was my first experience of Dr. King, the effect that his death had on the country and myself, my family. Later, as we've grown and have learned to look at life in a broader sense, we see Martin Luther King, Dr. King, and others as giants, spiritual giants, who affect an entire planet by their consciousness, by what they believed and how they lived, the example that they lived. And we read his words as we grow in consciousness. We grow up, we become more mature. We can read his words and see them for the incredible brilliance and wisdom and heart and divinity that he carried, the divine wisdom that he carried, and what a gift it was to humanity. And he's not the only one. There's been others that have done all they could, left it all on the table to help humanity, and he was one.
You're going to leave that right there, Julia? You don't have one?
No, that was very well said. And
Okay.
I will say last year we participated in something the NAACP put on. There's a little Ebenezer church in Knoxville, and we participated in a parade, like a car. Just it was what do they call it? A car. Anyway, there was like 30 cars. We were the only white people, and we went through like a lot of the black neighborhoods, and it was so beautiful to be a part of that. They played a broadcast on the that we could tune into on our radios, and it was beautiful. They were singing beautiful black spirituals with mixed in with some of Martin Luther King's speeches, just parts of them. And it was so impactful. That was a real special experience.
Yeah, so we garnered from everything that you guys have shared in the squares tonight, how important this man was to the betterment of our society, how important he is and remains. I agree, Greg. He did something from a place that not many of us get the opportunity to attach ourselves to. He was indeed a special individual, and you don't get the legacy or the opportunity to be an eternal part of something if you're not. So he's doing that thing that so many others have tried, and that is tapping into that fountain of youth, so to speak, that allows him to always be ever present. And he and a few others. And yeah, you mentioned the assassinations of the 60s. It's crazy. MLK and Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, RFK, JFK. It was definitely a strange time that you were around for. I wasn't. The rioting, yeah, what's to be expected when someone who presented himself and lived up to the idea of being the glue, of being the very fabric that held us together, is removed from the equation in such a dastardly way. Yeah, the reaction is going to be emotional. The reaction is going to be unsettling, to say the least. So I've read about those episodes that took place across the country, California to New York, New Jersey, Washington, Chicago. It's almost impossible to think that something like that wouldn't happen, given who he was and how much pride he instilled in the Black community, and the level of disappointment that even he could be taken away like that. So I'm going to play these 3 clips, and we'll come back on the other side and we'll answer that question. So I hope your brains are turning over and getting ready to answer that question. Hey, Marcus, how you doing, man? Glad you can make it. I'm glad to have you, and feel free to type something and share for those that are listening. But we're actually trying to answer the question, why do we celebrate the myth over the man when it comes to MLK? And I'm going to play a couple of clips in succession, and we'll come back.
First, I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers the negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that law and order exists for the purpose of establishing justice, and that when they fail in this purpose, they become the dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress. I had hoped that white moderates would understand that the present tension in the South is a necessary phase of the transition from an obnoxious negative peace in which the Negro passively accepted his unjust plight to a substantive and positive peace in which all men will respect the dignity and worth of human personality. Actually, we who engage in nonviolent direct action are not the creators of tension. We merely bring to the surface the hidden tension that is already alive. We bring it out in the open where it can be seen and dealt with. like a boil that can never be cured so long as it is covered up, but must be open with all its ugliness to the natural medicines of air and light. Injustice must be exposed with all the tension its exposure creates to the light of human conscience and the air of national opinion before it can be cured. To the massive
one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I must confess that that dream that I had that day has in many forms turned into a nightmare. Now, I'm not one to lose hope. I keep on hoping. I still have faith in the future. But I've had to analyze many things over the last few years, and I would say over the last few months. I've gone through a lot of soul-searching and agonizing moments. And I've come to see that we have many more difficult days ahead, and some of the old optimism was a little superficial, and now it must be tempered with a solid realism. And I think the realistic fact is that we still have a long, long way to go, and that we are involved in a war on Asian soil, which, if not checked and stopped, can poison the very soul of our nation. I'm not going to say that all of our problems will be solved if the war in Vietnam is ended, but I do say that the war makes it infinitely more difficult to deal with these problems. When a nation becomes obsessed with the guns of war, it loses its social perspective, and programs of social uplift suffer. This is just a fact of history, so that we do face many more difficulties as a result of the war. It's much more difficult to really arouse a conscience during the time of war. That is something about a war like this that makes people insensitive. It dulls the conscience. It strengthens the forces of reaction. And it brings into being bitterness, and hatred, and violence. I think the biggest problem now is that we got our gains over the last 12 years at bargain rate, so to speak. It didn't cost the nation anything. In fact, it helped the economic side of the nation to integrate lunch counters and public accommodations. It didn't cost the nation anything to get the right to vote established. Now we are confronting issues that cannot be solved without costing the nation billions of dollars. Now, I think this is where we're getting our greatest resistance. They may put it on many other things, but we can't get rid of slums and poverty without it costing the nation something. I feel that nonviolence is really the only way that we can follow, because violence is just so self-defeating. A riot ends up creating many more problems for the Negro community than it solves. You can, through violence, burn down a building, but you can't establish justice. You can murder a murderer, but you can't murder through violence. You can murder a hater, but you can't murder hate. And what we are trying to get rid of is hate, injustice, and all of these other things that continue the long night of man's inhumanity to man. When we allow freedom to reign, when we let it reign from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all the cross children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last. At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farm. Not only that, today many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. This is what we are faced with, and this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
All right. I hope that was edifying. That is the how you doing, Cam? That is the king that I know. That king that I have looked at with 2020 or 2030 vision. Yeah, it's a different king than the one that we received. The one clip, which is much longer if you ever choose to go view it, where he's standing in the church and the reporter's looking up at him. It's a much longer clip. I actually used it in my class last semester. But I like that version because it bookends the I Have a Dream speech. And in between, he's speaking about his dream becoming a nightmare so many years after that wonderful moment that America loves, because it was words of unification despite the circumstance that existed. And as he progressed himself in understanding that there was even more work to do, that the complacency was dangerous, as it always had been. His letter from Birmingham jail speaks to that complacency, that just wait, it'll happen, give it a little time, and the dangers of sitting on one's hands and knowing that there's got to be a heightened awareness to the circumstances and a heightened reaction to them. So yeah, those are clips that I think frame the king that I know, based on my readings and the various connections I've made via documentary, books, speeches. If you go read some of his writings, go visit the museum. All of those type things will give you a much clearer view of the man. But that brings us to the answering of this question, right? So why do we choose the myth over the man, right? I think those clips can kind of give you an idea as to what is selected by the powers that be, by media, by the stabilizers of our society, as not being the ones that are the more popular views that he held. So that could be one answer. I'll begin, and please just this is a different type way we're doing the show, and it is in honor of that great man. When I asked the question why we choose the myth over the man, I said because we know the dire consequences of speaking truth to power with a level of conviction that arouses the masses. We know the dire consequences, and sometimes those consequences aren't dire. Sometimes those consequences are actually effectual change. But that growth moment can be so disrupting and so uncomfortable to so many American citizens that it's a fearful thing. That's why those terms radical and militant, revolutionary, find their way to application to someone who made it clear that he was a nonviolent person, that he would turn the other cheek. But there's a work out somewhere called The Radical King, because so much of the type of reaction and language that he used in those clips I just showed is so suppressed. It's so suppressed, but it's always been there. Bob, what do you got? Anything? Any thoughts?
Yeah. Thanks. Foundationally, this goes directly to what we talk about a lot in my sense of our culture being all around myth and delusion. And we are a culture in every facet, it seems to me, where we pick and choose. Pick the Bible. We can have 1,000 references to love, and we pick out 2 references to exclusion. Why is that? We sift through history and story and whatnot, and we pick and choose what we want to grasp and what we want to dismiss. And again, I said earlier, I was alive when Dr. King was alive, and I remember the variations of perspective and so forth and so forth. And yet our culture is one of, we will build the history and the story of the history to be the one that we want it to be, or the one that we're comfortable with, regardless of what the truth is. And so, I don't know, we just aren't oriented around truth. We're not oriented around transparency. We're not oriented around accountability. We are oriented around myth and delusion and building a story. And that myth and delusion started with the fact that we wrote a constitution that we have never honored, we have never fulfilled, and we have never respected anyone in truth who expects us to be accountable to that we wrote and that we built. So why is it that I think Dr. King struggled himself with idealism evolving to realism, and then what do we do with that? And what do we make of that? Because we've always failed with that. We fail the people that, why do we think of him as we do? Because we want to.
Wonderful answer. I'll share another one of my answers before I go to Greg and Julia, because I think this one speaks kind of to where you're at, bullseye in some opinion. I said another answer is because by doing so, we remove the shared responsibility we have to force our country to live up to its professed ideals. You're absolutely right. We'll go with that sanitized, lesser than, less radical king, because it doesn't require us to hold our nation accountable or to push it forward towards the founding documents communication as to what we are supposed to be about. So I agree, Bob. Greg and Julia, what are your thoughts?
We hadn't heard any of the first clip about the letter from Birmingham jail, and that was so powerful. Concur with everything Bob and Felton you just shared. That was a
clip, Julia, very important. You can get the letter and read the whole thing. So that was just a portion of it. So yeah, absolutely.
That's what, we wrote that down because Gregory said, I want to hear the whole thing. There were some things set up during World War II. We recently heard an interview. Is it John Meacham, the historian that writes books? But he spent a lot on Martin Luther King and Churchill, and he has a big history podcast. But there was a quote that stood out, that the biggest sin is good people doing nothing. not speaking out. And I think that's what Bob spoke to and you spoke to, that why should that? You know, white people were comfortable and they're faced with this reality that they don't want to accept. And the other thing was, we heard that this big war hero from the Second World War said, the interviewer said something about the greatest, but that was the greatest generation. He said, no, Martin Luther King and the people that stood against the war, that was the greatest generation. And I thought, we've never heard anything like that before. It's against everything that we've heard. But why is it that we want to be, we're afraid of being uncomfortable? We're afraid of seeing the truth because it makes us uncomfortable. You know, Felton, there's been many uncomfortable nights growing up in Charleston, South Carolina. So it's been great. We need to face these truths.
Yeah,
Can I add one thing?
Give me 1 second, Bob, and
Sure.
I wanted to, and I'll come right back to you. I'll come right back to you before I get to Mary and Will and Cece. Real quick, Julia, I want to say the growth requires stretching, and stretching can be painful, and that's something I got from a former boss of mine, Myrna Wigley. I appreciate you. So you can't stretch if you don't grow, or you can't grow if you don't stretch. And stretching can be painful. But I truly appreciate you guys and anybody that spends time with me in the way that you and I and Greg and Bob and Mary at points now, Cece's at moments, because I can't be a bit of a bitter pill when it comes to conversations like this, so to speak. The time is now. It's not yesterday, it's not tomorrow, it's right now. And that kicking of the can has to stop. So I'm glad that you guys are a part of understanding how much of an emergency it is. We can't continue to play the game that so many before us have. We have to be hands-on. Bob, make your comment really quickly, and then I'm gonna get to the rest of the group, and I'll come back around.
Yeah, very quickly. King used the term hate, and we were talking about some things earlier. Part of the problem, I think, is King uses a term hate. White people go, oh, we can't be hateful. We have to be. And so all of a sudden, we have this crowd of people, the moderates that he was talking about. Okay, we can't be hateful. So let's moderate this. Let's kind of modulate this in a way that we can be nice, not be hateful. Let's be patient. Let's find our right time. Let's do all this, blah, 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 blah. It's this gentility of whiteness, that moderate whiteness, that again doesn't face truth, because we want it to be, we want it both ways. We want to be the nice people, and we want to also. So I think that in this whole world of stuff, we've got this centerpiece of people that, oh, we want to be nice. We want to keep it this way. We want to be nice, want to keep it this way. We can't let go of that, but we want to be nice. And so how do we manage this middle space? And I think that to King's point, is the most frustrating and problematic space, because there's nothing to come from it constructive.
Yeah, and quickly, Julia, to your point, I would love to see that documentary where the World War II veteran said that, because I've had that conversation with some people, and a friend of mine the other day shared, I like history and I'm interested in history, and generally my interest falls into World War II, and this is a white person, and I'm okay, that's great. Generally, that's where it does fall, because it's described as that greatest generation because America stepped up, had to be pulled and kicking and dragging at certain points, and of course, Pearl Harbor was very motivating. But America stepped up to defeat fascism. But the whole time that that's taking place, America is marred in racism, in discrimination. And that can't make you the greatest generation if you come home to that and are okay with it. Your actions can be commendable. I appreciate defending democracy to that level and defeating Hitler. Very important. But yeah, that's an outstanding take by the guy that you mentioned. You have to send me that documentary title. CC, give me your thoughts and what your answer to the question why we choose the myth over the man.
I'm gonna have to agree that it comes down to comfort. And in one of the clips you played, he talks about giving the right to vote cost nothing, but the other things that are being asked for cost a lot monetarily. I think that it's terrible when you use someone who was radical, who conjoined racial injustice with economic injustice, who allied racial oppression with class subjection. So when he was saying that we needed the right to vote, and again, it cost them nothing, they fought over it, but in the end, just give it to them, right? But when he started to cross the lines into labor, when he started to tell, both white and, at the time he said Negro, but Black workers, that they were both equally oppressed, when he started to make them aware as a joined community that their levels of existence needed to be raised, and that that their living standards should be consistent with the natural resources, then you're threatening the natural order of the have and the have-nots. When he started saying that that there's no logic to social distinction, when he started making it known that that the economically depressed white workers, they were willing to accept poverty by telling him or her that at least you're better than the Negro. And then they settle for, if they're still insecure, I mean, they're still going hungry, they're still unhoused, there's still hopelessness. And the fact that he began to bridge the gap between the two demographics and to show white workers that Black people wanted the same things, a decent wage. We're still fighting for that. Fair working conditions, still fighting for that. Livable housing, old age security, health, welfare measures, resources, conditions where families can thrive in dignity. Like, this upsets the order of have and have nots, because as long as they can keep us fighting with one another, then we don't look at the exact cause of our misery. And so I think that the reason he really became a threat is because he began talking about a movement in which color does have some point in it, but the overall injustice is that working people were not getting what in the richest country in the world they should get as their share. And so if you want to keep control over people, you find ways to split them up. And I think that is why they continue to use, the I have a dream speech and excerpts from that to talk to us about, because saying that you should be humble, saying that you should be meek, and saying those are just ways to keep us from fighting for what we deserve. So I think it is a myth. People try to use his most tame speeches, or pick apart, because if you listen to the whole speech, that one little portion is not the entirety of what he said. And so they'll pick that one little piece and keep beating you over the head with it as a way to keep you meek and docile instead of what he really wanted. Sorry, I got long.
No, I get some of the aspects that you are approaching in terms of what he showed himself to be throughout the course of his activism in trying to make America a better place. The ideas around the shared experience of the lower class whites and blacks was nothing new at the time. Near the end of his life, the clip that I showed where he was speaking about reparations, when he said we come to get our check, his focus was becoming more centralized in terms of understanding that, as you stated, and as he stated, as you repeated, the civil rights movement didn't cost anything, and it actually increased economic viability in society. So the beautiful thing about people, great people, such as Martin Luther King Jr., is that the process never ends in terms of understanding the deficiencies of the society that they're trying to fix. The deficiencies are woven in, spider webby. It's almost like when Indiana Jones walks into the cave and gets crap all over him. It's like when we walk in the spider webs. I'm tall. I walk in the spider webs all the time. So I'm just always like, it never comes off. It feels like it's always on you. But that's the nature of the society and all of the things that it has done to build up the momentum that you speak of, CC, that leads to people not having enough and not crying foul to the society that can provide if his feet are held to the fire. I'll read a quote of MLK's that centralizes his focus on Black Americans, and then I'm coming to Mary and Will, and we'll get some final thoughts. But a society that has done something special against the Negro for hundreds of years must now do something special for him in order to equip him to compete on a just and equal basis. Immediately after slavery, there was all kinds of conversations around a real endeavor to economically empower America's greatest workforce, the people responsible for building the country. During the Civil War in Georgia, Sherman is negotiating with Black community members and pastors. Field Order 15 was 40 acres. That was where 40 acres and a mule came from. That was a real thing. That was a part of negotiation. He asked these people, what do you need? That's what Sherman asked them. And they said land. That's one of the things that was necessary during that period of time. You had to grow stuff and you had to farm. And those are real things that took place. We don't have time to go down and talk about Reconstruction, but everybody knows that was a touchy subject for me because it's one of the greatest failures of this country. We had an opportunity to do something absolutely right, and we chose another path. Mary and Will, let's hear your thoughts. Why did we choose the myth over the man?
I think the part about centrists standing in the way is absolutely correct, and it's been persistent for a long time. I call them centrists. Dr. King called them moderates. But centrists, I heard a phrase once, centrists are the cars in the way that are not allowing the ambulance to get through. And so there is a crisis, and people want to do the right things, but the centrists keep blocking the path. and that's still an issue. And I think there's a lot of denial of the collective wound that Black people carry. There's a lot of denial of that. And there's a lot of, I mean, if you even just try to bring up the subject of equity around most white people, they just like, it's like this dome goes down over them, and they just don't even want to hear about it or talk about it. I consistently have that experience with most people. And these can be people that I otherwise really like. You know, they can be what most of us would consider very good people, and that, you know, care about others and do good things in the world. And, you know, everybody's got their flaws, but they're pretty much good people that you would expect to make the right choices. But when it comes to this, that complacency thing is just baffling. It's baffling how it just continues on and on and on. And without that central group of people shifting their mindset, it's difficult for small groups and tribes and silos, as you would say, Felton, silos of people to try to bring about any significant move and changes in any kind of short period of time. It seems like it takes forever to make the smallest little bit of progress. And I like that part that Bob said about history is like a movie that has been edited for the comfort of people today so that they can handle it and so that they don't get all upset. And I can't understand that either, because, you know, life is life on life's terms. Is you deal with what happened, you deal with what has happened, you deal with what is happening, you deal with what's going to happen. That's life. If you're alive, that's life. But people have a tremendous amount of denial operating all the time. All the time. And, you know, comfort isn't just about a roof over your head, clothes on your back, and food in your belly. It's very much a mental state that I've seen a lot, probably in the last 10 years, of the spiritual community that likes to be the progressive spiritual community, moving further and further into that mindset of everything is bliss and everything is, you know, and, you know, I'm a very spiritual person, but I can't go there because I see that everything is not bliss. And there are people in this country that need my help. There are people in the world that need my help. And I can't go under the dome of denial. I just can't. I can't do it. Like Will said, I'm not wired that way. And I find that it's not just past history from a long time ago or even 100 years ago that gets edited into the comfortable movie. It can even be current events. We've gotten into such a habit of keeping everybody so comfortable that even current events are being edited to change the story almost as fast as they happen. And it's like, that's a dangerous pattern. And I don't know how to break that one either. I just am pointing out that this is something that I see is an issue in the present, not just past history pertinent.
Yeah. So wonderful words. And you and I have had discussions that have definitely been inside of the same realm. Will, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I guess
Thanks, Aaron.
quick point. I've noticed on thresholds of change in my life and changes in the bigger world that when you get to the threshold, it's like the resistance really comes up the biggest to meet you. You got to really make a push to get through on the big ones. I also noticed that most of the monuments our country puts up are to war heroes or wars in general. I noticed you look at our Bible or whatever in the Bible, the Old Testament is a warrior's story. And this is it changed in the second half, but that first half, you know, it's the warriors very much ingrained. And I think when King got toward the end of his mountain there, that he started looking at the stuff that it just isn't even questioned. You look at the civil rights, and it's like, okay, this is easy to see. We got different fountains, blah, blah, you know, they got all that, some of this stuff taken care of. But the deeper stuff that, you know, the inequity of the capitalism in general, I guess. He was talking about socialist stuff. He was really, I mean, socialist for the people, not socialist for the corporations. You know, not the military as a jobs corps. You know, that it got tremendous backlash from the powers that be. The Powell memorandum and whatnot. Just, I mean, Nixon. We're not standing for this stuff.
They don't ever want black and white people and other races to unite against the powers that be, because it wouldn't last long if we did.
They don't want you and I or anybody else who's not in the club trying to run the show.
And that is magnified by the unlimited amount of exploitation that takes place against Black Americans from people who just get here, from people who are within the Black American community, from people who've been here forever. The exploitation of Black Americans is endless. And because there's something that can be made off of that, it makes what you guys just alluded to that much more of a mountain to climb. But yeah, wonderful comments. Did you have anything else you wanted to add, Will?
No, not I.
Well, wonderful comments. I'm going to read a quote that you just kind of alluded to about the capitalism thing, and then I'll make a couple of comments, and then we'll get out of here. But something is wrong. This is MLK. Something is wrong with capitalism. Maybe America must move toward a democratic socialism. We must develop programs that will drive the nation to the realization of the need for a guaranteed annual income. So yeah, he was definitely understanding that the more he chipped away at one thing, something else over here needed some attention. And he was giving it all some attention. And Bob, it kind of brings me to that comment I made to you more recently when we were having a discussion, that wonderful sound bite of JFK saying, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And I was saying to Bob, we might need to invert that and say, ask what our country can do for us, as opposed to, you know, what we can do for it, because we're at a crossroads right now.
Yeah,
I'm coming back around, Bob. I'm coming back around, and we're gonna do some last departing remarks. I'm gonna get this last bit out because Mary, you said something that made me think about these two words, and they're those type words that you know what they mean when you hear them, because they're not really everyday words. Whataboutism is that thing that pops up from so many people when they're talking, and you get to that point that causes that thing to come down, that protection you mentioned, that it's whataboutism. What else? Well, there's something else. There's got to be something besides this Black American thing. It's this whataboutism. And what gets us to the point that we've been discussing overall, and something Cece was mentioning in terms of this realization that these groups of people find some commonality, and that becomes the ultimate disruptor, whether it's the fusion movement that took place in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and what have you. But MLK mentions when the thingification of Black Americans has led to a legacy of denial of their humanity. And somebody earlier was discussing why is it so hard to understand that we're all human from certain groups of people and such. The thingification, when you have spent generation upon generation othering a complete group of people who have done nothing but try to be as everyone else in the society, it becomes something that is a form of conditioning that everyone becomes attached to, whether they're conscious of it or not, even those that are that thing, or that thing that people that are thingified. I'm going to leave my comments there. I'll come back around. Please make a couple of brief comments if you have them. If not, just say good night, because we're already over time. Bob, I'm starting with you.
Just going to say, we have the power and the capability to solve both economic, educational, health issues if we were to simply choose to. And our absence of that choice tells me who we are as a people. We can fix it. We need to choose that.
I agree with that sentiment, and I think it is now upon us in the most dire way to understand that we have to choose better leaders, and I think that's exactly where addressing this stuff will be taken more seriously by those who aren't in it for the political gains, so to speak. Gregory Jr., any departing words?
Just so appreciative of CC's always Bob and Marion Will's comments. It's been a beautiful discussion, and it's our responsibility. I mean, where we are is because of course, history, but we can, like Bob said, make a difference by making correct choices.
All right, appreciate that. Mary Will, any departing shots?
It's been a great conversation. It's nice to spend a little time with thinking people.
Right.
And I appreciate everybody being here and being able to hear other people's perspectives is helpful for me because it makes me feel like I'm not losing my mind living in this world,
That's how the exchange works. I totally appreciate you being here too, Mary. And Will, it's a pleasure to meet you.
You
and
too,
I look forward to us maybe sitting down sometime. Look forward to it. All right.
Good.
CC, any last words before we get out of here for this evening?
I really thought you were so close to saying it. I thought you were going to say, we all too often have socialism for the rich and rugged free market capitalism for the poor. I just knew you were about to pull that.
I didn't get to that quote, but it was there. It was there for me. And I credit Leonard Pitts Jr., a columnist who does wonderful columns. He published a good piece that talked about the quotes that are less utilized by the conservatives. I did see that one and I'm aware of it, but yeah, time. We're already so far over, but I enjoy it. I'm glad you guys are here. And when people stay, you don't know what that does for me. So I appreciate you guys hanging around. So go ahead, CC.
Nope, that was it. I was listening to Bob and you said I have a quote and I was like, oh, I know where he's going.
See, I have to make sure when I go to MLK's quotes, because of my ideas around where we need to be, and it's about recentering American Blackness right now. It's about us fixing the thing we never did. I have to make sure. But that quote goes just like all the rest of them. It just was not the one that I went to immediately. But I planned on reading all of them, but I didn't get the chance.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. I actually really love these. And like what was just said, it is so nice to have just a good conversation with no drama.
Yeah, safe space. That's important to me. There's nobody. I don't ask people to come to this space to offend anyone. It's just to do something that we definitely do not do enough of, and that's communicate, connect, find common ground, whatever the case is. I'm here for it, and I appreciate you guys showing up. And you don't know how much it means when people stay this long. So I'm kind of testing it now. I won't test it any longer. You guys have a wonderful evening. I appreciate you all. Gregory, Julia, Mary, Will, CC, thank you. Bob, of course, I appreciate you, man. You all have a wonderful, wonderful evening. And Danya, thanks for what you do, man. Take care.